Hey, it's Tori.
And I'm Olivia. If you're listening to this, you've entered our Double Tap episode with Matt Klein. Welcome.
As a quick refresher, Matt is a cultural strategist and writer whose work sits at the intersection of technology, media, and human behavior. He's currently the head of Foresight at Reddit and the author of Zine, where he studies the many obvious and not so obvious ways digital systems shape how we relate, perform, and make meaning.
In this full conversation, we go deeper into the ideas Matt shared with us, from how digital platforms turn relationships into performance, to why the loss of backstage space is impacting our ability to be present, curious, and emotionally resilient with ourselves and others.
Let's get into it. Matt, we are so excited to have you here today. No joke, when you said yes to coming on the podcast, Olivia and I immediately texted each other and we're like, fuck yeah. Big win for the team. Like, no joke, we have the receipts. We can share them with people later. And that, I believe, is for good reason. Your work sits at this fascinating intersection of culture, technology, and social dynamics. And as we look closer at relationships in this episode, whether they are personal, professional, or societal, it's clear that technology and media have fundamentally changed the way that we engage with one another. And while some of these shifts are, have created incredible opportunities for connection, specifically the globalization of connection, others have created new challenges around, let's say, boundaries, authenticity, and trust, which is honestly the most concerning to me because without trust, you really cannot build or nurture positive, healthy relationships. So I want to start us off with the basics. How do you define relationships in the context of technology and media? And so first, let me just provide like a personal example of how I'm approaching this question. Sometimes on social media, I'll end up in, let's say, a close friends group, and I'm like, excuse me, how did we get here? I genuinely don't feel like I've earned that level of access to this person's life. And then it kind of makes me a little skeptical of how they define friendships, which then like kind of hinders me wanting to build one. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking to you to help me make sense of things
Absolutely.
like that.
So first of all, thank you so much for that introduction. It really does mean a lot. I appreciate our budding relationship. So maybe we take one step back to really understand what's happening here, which is before we can even define it, maybe we acknowledge that technology and media itself is not always neutral, especially when it comes to our relationships, that it often distorts and skews our perceptions of what's happening. And there's, endless books about the effects of what this is doing to relationships. But for me, I think what's most fundamental is it is skewing our perception of audience in ways that is very different than our relationships in offline experiences. We are now forming relationships on a stage. And when we form a relationship on a stage, we are not behaving organically. We are performing. Now, that isn't really entirely that new of a concept. There's a sociologist, Irving Goffman, who proposes this idea of a self-presentation, where in every social interaction, we are performing to a certain extent. This is way before social media ever existed. And the idea is we're on stage, and based upon who is in our audience, we are positioning accordingly, based upon what we're wearing, how we speak, vernacular, body movements, right? We're posturing. This is not to say we're lying to any audience or, deceiving them, but who I am to my friends at a bar is very different than who I am at a Thanksgiving table.
Totally.
Right?
I love that you're mentioning this because I always say actually to a lot of my clients, my executive coaching clients, I'm like, it's okay to be strategic with your communication. That doesn't make you inauthentic.
Exactly
There's
right.
a difference.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, where things get super tricky is when we have an audience that isn't just a handful of people, but now the world watching every single interaction. And then further, all those interactions are documented indefinitely for all of human history. So we can now go back and look at every single small little movement or quote or kind of body posture, and that hangs over us. So the long short there is, how do you define relationships? That's really hard. But I think maybe the first step is acknowledging that the
Mhm.
tools in which we're using to form relationships are distorting our perception of communication, expression, and even bonding, because we're almost distracted by all these eyes on us that we can't even be natural. So I think because of that lack of naturalness, or kind of organic nature to how we typically form bonds
Yeah.
and relationships, because it's so public, that's where I think we are getting into some trouble. And
Yeah.
what those repercussions are run the gambit.
It's just like not as clean cut anymore. It's not that you, go to the grocery store, you meet someone, you have a conversation, you're like, I like this person, you decide to become friends, and maybe you invite that person over for dinner and you continue to kind of have that kind of relationship. Now, I actually think Olivia and I's relationship is a great case study here because our relationship started online. I DM'd her on LinkedIn randomly about like a business related thing, pitched her on something with a client. And then we realized, oh, we both live in LA, we have mutual connections. And that is kind of, I think, what established some trust, right? Like, oh, we like the same type of people, let's hang out. And so we ended up meeting in person, and our our friendship, I feel like, flourished very quickly. I invited her to my wedding, like literally after
Love it.
meeting her, I think the first or second time, because I was like, oh, this is somebody that I want to be around. And I think that's interesting, right? Because there's really a blurring of like online and offline relationships as well, and how this person who went from being a complete stranger did go to being kind of, in real life, a close friend in some kind of way. I think that what worries me, to go a little bit deeper into a specific impact
Mhm.
of, let's say, something like the messaging of close friends. How do features like that, so the messaging of close friends,
Mhm.
like how do you feel that that might erode the depth of friendships in real life?
It's a great observation, because what's happening there is we are literally defining it, right? Like we're
Yeah.
categorizing and putting a
Yeah.
label or a sticker onto you're a close friend.
Hmm.
So it's tricky. And you compare that to any offline experience. You're not showing up to a coffee to say, "Hi, close friend, you are now in this circle," right?
Right.
It's unspoken.
Yeah.
So what's happening, and I think why it feels so tricky, is because a lot of these features are labeling and speaking on our behalf, even if it isn't something we're actually um, feeling. So it's almost playing, these platforms play as a third party or third wheel to a lot of our
Hmm.
relationships. And in some cases, it's healthy and it's productive. There's table setting. No different. I mean, we could get into dating apps in a second, but like in some regards, these platforms help set the table and help kind of bring us together or match us, whatever it may be. And I think that's healthy and productive. But I think,
Yeah.
to your point and kind of what you're alluding at the same time, they're also doing speaking on our behalf, where it's like, whoa, 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 wait a second, I didn't ask for that. That's not actually how I feel. That's not what I'm kind of get at or trying to get at. And what can you do about it? You can't really do anything, because it's baked into our communication medium. So the only way to
Yeah.
kind of get over that is now leave. But then, to your point, and I experienced the same thing, I formed incredible relationships on online platforms that have transcended to offline spaces. So to opt out is simply sometimes unfair, because
Yeah.
we're kind of tethered or shackled to these things. And I think the only way, without getting into solution space, to overcome that is just ensure we're hyper articulate or hyper
Hmm.
expressive and overcompensate for things that may be misinterpreted.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point. And one thing that I do really want to call out is I love how you answer questions, because I think you allow them to be messy. Like you're not ever trying to put something in a box. And again, I think that's
Yeah.
why we really wanted you on this podcast. But I think to go back also to the authenticity versus curation, right? So like being strategic about what you're sharing. I think something that I think about a lot, and especially of in relation to the younger generation, is well, there actually might be people out there now who feel like they can be more authentic with an AI chatbot than on a social platform or in real life. And that to me feels like incredibly relevant and fascinating. And like, I want to unpack that so
That's
much. So I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are on that, just to pull out
yeah.
authenticity versus curation again.
Okay, two things. Let's see if I can remember both. Let's literally take one more step backwards to where we left off with Goffman. So Goffman's whole theory was that there was this thing called a backstage,
Mm,
where, at the end of the day, you take a shower, you're about to go to bed, like you are backstage, like you're able
mm,
to decompress, you're alone, your thoughts kind of bubble, it's super messy, but like it's intimate, and your makeup's off, whatever it may be,
yeah.
metaphorically. If we relate this back to online spaces, there is no backstage, right? There's no place where you are hidden and able to kind of take off whatever costume or performance you currently had on. So I think it is that lack of backstage that's contributing to our anxiety. So
Hmm.
to relate that to the whole AI intimacy, I think that's as close to some backstages in online environments that we can get to, where like there's no eyes on me. What's being discussed is between me and my AI companion.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly refreshing for some people. Now, the last thing I'll share is I don't think that's as insightful as realizing that what does it say about culture that we lack backstages?
Absolutely. 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 Because it's like we don't create those spaces for ourselves. Again, this is something that I love about the content that you share and how important mindfulness is, and like autonomy, the autonomy and agency we have, even though these social platforms or digital platforms don't give us these things, we can still
Yeah.
create them for ourselves. So before, because I feel like that starts to definitely get into some solutions there. Before we get into that, I do want to ask you, like, what relationship dynamics in particular do you think have been most profoundly impacted by the digital age, and isn't really talked about enough?
Mm. I'm going to punt this answer. I'm going to semi punt this answer. I think the most profoundly impacted relationship is the one with ourself.
I like snaps. I'm so glad you said that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
let's see if I can riff on this for a second. I think a part of that is that backstage thing, to click into that again, to use our tech metaphor or puns. We haven't carved out a whole lot of reflection time, alone time, that we're able to form that relationship with self. And I think that's driven by, it's kind of a cliche, but just our attention economy, where we are
Hmm.
incentivized to give our attention to other things and to other people
Hmm.
rather than to ourselves. And I think also with that, we're also in a moment where we've made it very easy to find convenience, or to find answers that fit existing narratives, or to find people that give us the
Yeah.
messages that we want to hear. So I think for that reason as well, we found this kind of moment of complete frictionlessness.
Hmm.
And to look at yourself in the mirror is to confront your own, I don't know, insecurities, hard truths, messiness, just all that
Hmm.
stuff. And I think we currently live in a culture in which we are so good at optimizing those things away, that because we're offered the alternative, or kind of the off ramp to not have to confront those things, we've done it. I think a result of that has been, well, I don't know, I'm not going to say this is causation. It's probably more correlation. But as a result of that, we're facing a pretty grim anxiety crisis.
Hmm.
And the irony is perhaps leading a little bit more into the friction and into the discomfort is what may, I don't know, dissolve some of that anxiety. Now, by no means am I a psychologist here, but I would argue from studying culture and our relationship with media, the frictionlessness and the infinite likes and all of that stuff um, is not helping us as much as perhaps a little bit of a journal entry and headspace session.
Because it's kind of like why I think the mindset that people tend to fall into is why would I do the hard work that it takes to build a friendship or a romantic relationship, let's say a partnership, when I can go on social media and feel kind of in some ways, right, a facade of connection and feel like I'm getting that in some way so easily, where these people that I'm interacting with also share my viewpoints. I don't have to disagree, like I don't have to do any of the hard messy stuff. I can just show up here and everybody's going to just mirror everything that I'm putting out there, and that's just so much easier. So I feel like we're getting to this place of like complacency, I want to say, with like the bare minimum of what connection can be in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, as a kind of a follow-up to that, like what do you think of the digital design of dating apps?
Oh my God.
I'm coming in hot, Matt.
Horrific. They're horrific. I'm very fortunate. I feel very, very fortunate to no longer be on the apps, but I have been for close to a decade. And these apps would have you believe that their intent is to match people and to get you off the platform.
Hmm.
Now, there are some organizations that claim in their slogans designed to be deleted.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. So, with that, I think it's an incredible, noble slogan, but that is antithetical to their business model,
Hmm.
right? They do not want you gone, plain and simple. Even tobacco companies want you alive to continue your smoking habits.
Hmm.
So, to claim that we don't want you here is, it takes
Ridiculous.
such mental gymnastics. Well, maybe, well, we want you off so you share with your friends and family that that's the one that worked, to you get more people on that. Maybe, fine. So the phrase that I've tried seeding, and what we're missing, is this idea of fiduciary dating,
Mm.
where platforms and apps are incentivized for one's success. And
Mhm.
I don't see that in the current business models, but I do think there are ways in which apps are designed to truly be deleted and for that to be represented in their business models. We just don't see that today. So I think in the meantime, for us to think that these apps truly care about success, I think is a little idealistic. And there's a whole array of reasons. And very quickly, I think these apps do not allow for a full spectrum of expression. You have 6 photos and 5 prompts, and to think that that's a person is ridiculous.
Yep.
We have embedded our same gamified social media slot machine dynamics into that of attraction. I
Mhm.
think there is no friction in it, and the hyper convenience of finding a mate on the toilet is pretty intense.
I love that.
Another, it sounds superficial, but there's this idea of like set and setting that like it takes a mind state to kind of like put your best foot forward and to kind of engage. And if you're doing that from a state or a headspace where it's blah, 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 you're flipping through photos and you're treating people like just that, a photo and not a person,
Yeah.
that's not helping. And then lastly, I don't think these applications incentivize true pro-social behavior, that you can be a flake, you can ghost, you can bait people, you can string people along, and there are no repercussions whatsoever. I think one of the greatest things about dating before dating apps is that while yes, you were stuck to a closed circle, at least you had to have a reputation and
Mhm.
foster a positive reputation. You could
Mhm.
be the biggest asshole and no one will know unless you get screenshotted and put in a Facebook app of like, hey, stay away from this person.
Mhm.
So without going blue in the face, I think there are ways in which applications can be designed to be deleted, but I think the ways in which they're currently constructed is no different than that of any other gamified platform.
I mean, to double tap into that a little bit more, how like what changes would result in a more pro-social behavior from the app users.
There's interesting studies that show when, and this is something that, current platforms that we're discussing do employ, that when an app presents two matches as if like, hey, we think this person is the right fit, rather than, going through your feed of like, hey, whether that be a human curator or an AI curator, hey, Matt, I think based upon this data, we think that you're going to be a good fit with this person. That changes the way in which you show up to that conversation versus a total number. And I think that's one that actually should be given credit because it's actually employed. There are other platforms that rely a little bit more upon the matchmaking process where, hey, I'm going to interview a whole slew of people and go out and find people for you. And within that, you're only allowed 1, 2, or 3 icks or no's. In other words, like you have to set your criteria. You could pick height or religion, and that's it. You can't say anything else of what you don't want. And I think those are actually pretty smart ways of allowing people to truly prioritize what they want versus find reasons why they don't like someone as soon as they find someone.
Absolutely. It's the prioritization piece. Like force again, it's like encouraging a person to sit down, create that space independently and ask myself, what are my priorities? And also that phrasing that you just said, I think these people would be good for you, that also encourages critical thinking, which it encourages that person to go, well, you think this, but I might not think this, and sit down and
Yeah.
do a bit more research
Yeah.
before going on a date. Or, with Bumble, you can meet friends on those apps. So yeah, I also think critical thinking is a key piece there and something that could be encouraged more. And I feel like we're at an all-time low in terms of critical thinking skills.
So
I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, to connect some of these dots together, I think what we're discussing is a little bit of mindfulness as a prerequisite before showing up to one of these
Yes.
platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a cliche, and I'm sure it comes up in multiple podcasts that you're having on all this stuff. But I mean, it's very difficult to be in a relationship if you're not first in a relationship with yourself, or to love someone else before you love yourself. And this is a tall order to ask dating platforms, but maybe it's worthwhile. How can they also design programs to help people love
Yes.
themselves so they have more success on these platforms?
That's an incredible idea and thought, because I think there is so much. Those companies and the apps, they really do have the power to help people become more mindful, to become more autonomous, to like flex their agency. And right now, to your earlier point about the business model, it's like they're just so focused on the business model that they're forgetting. I think oftentimes this happens a lot when companies start to scale. They forget how much power they have over the people that interact with their products or their services, and how they can leverage that in these more positive, healthy ways and still produce an outcome, in their bottom line.
Spot on.
And I just think that gets so lost as companies scale, because, you think about, I'm bringing up a specific company here, but Bumble, the way that has changed over time. And I collaborated with them very early on in my career, and it was very different. Like, they would have these incredible intimate events all throughout New York City and different cities. I've attended them, where it was really about that like social IRL social first engagement, where it was like, meet people, figure out who do you like here, and then go on the app. And that was more the narrative. Whereas I feel like now it's app first. Come to the app and match with people, and that's kind of the journey that they're encouraging.
To empathize a little bit though, and I think the reason why they're in a hard place is because, I mean, let's call it what it is. No organization or platform wants to be the one to make someone feel uncomfortable.
Totally.
Just plain and simple, right?
Yeah.
I think there are ways in which you can't do it without turning people off or, hating you. It takes a little bit of probably, judo or a little bit of reframings and pivots, but I do think it's possible. I would just empathize and like, it's unsurprising why we don't see it.
Oh yeah, it's not surprising at all, because again, I think it goes back to even that individual behavior of you want to go the frictionless route, right?
Yeah,
Or the path with the least amount of
yeah,
friction. And I think companies, as do human beings, do
of
that,
course,
right? And human beings do that, so companies do that because human beings run and operate companies.
of course.
um yeah, really, really fascinating.
Really
Next
quick, I
thing that
want to
I
jump
love.
in.
Yeah.
I just also would challenge, like, is connection meant to scale? I think, like, when you look at communities and you think about the most kind of powerful and nostalgic moment of communities, so often it's like that early stage at the grassroots when the first people are getting together, and there's that space, there's the numbers where real connection is able to happen. And then as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it starts to lose some of that magic. And at the end of the day, these companies are required to be built to scale. And how do you allow those two things to be true in a sense? And I think when it comes to social media, it is connection at scale, but then it just dilutes the value and intensity of that connection.
I hear that. I think there's another angle, which is, and this is again kind of like a punt of a and, which is like it's so dependent and so contextual based upon why are we trying to connect with other people. So in the dating app context, yeah, maybe. I mean, we could think of, other online communities where maybe it's a support community for those experiencing or going through breast cancer, or maybe it's a
Hmm.
community for children who are having to watch their parents go through a divorce. To a certain extent, yeah, it would be great if that was an intimate kind of small community, but there's not a whole lot of people, relatively speaking, that you could kind of find around the corner. So in which case, having a scaled community for that thing is actually a part of the value proposition because they're so hard to find. So I guess that's to say, like, I think what we're discussing, it's hard to paint these like broad stroke brushes because like communities serve different purposes and different sizes and scales mean different things. So maybe something in between, and what I agree with is something like LinkedIn. Like
Yeah.
we can only have 150 maintained relationships at a certain given point in time. Maybe LinkedIn can give us more than 150. But to be connected with 3,000 people is absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Hmm.
You don't need to be collecting people at that rate. So that's the other side of the spectrum, where I think based upon our intent or the purpose of this platform or this network, we kind of get to change the dials based upon what best fits this use case.
Again, it's coming back to that idea of mindfulness before showing up on a platform. And to your point about a community that's more focused on people who are navigating a cancer diagnosis, that's someone saying, I need help for this specific reason. And this is why I'm seeking connection, which, like the larger platforms, let's say, whether it's a dating app or it's a social media app, they're not, you don't have to do that really to go on those apps. Obviously for dating, you're showing up and you're like, I want to be in a relationship in some sense.
Yeah.
um, but there's something so specific about a community like that, which is, there are obviously platforms that are popping up that are
Mhm.
serving these needs of that connect online through specific, let's say, lived experiences or hobbies or interests to connect offline. And we're seeing more of that, which I think is a huge bright spot in terms of what's happening on these platforms. But again, it comes back to that theme of like mindfulness and
Yeah.
asking yourself what you really need at any given time before you show up on these platforms. And like it's okay that that changes over time too. I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, is that your intent can change. Like you don't always have to show up if you're a part of this community, and because again you're going through this really hard thing, you might be really engaged for a period of time, and then it's like it's okay to disengage as well. So that's something else I think that feels a little more specific too here, is like, how does one balance that like engagement versus
Yeah.
disengagement? And I actually loved the article that you wrote not too long ago about logging off and like trying to completely eliminate, let's say, a social media platform, and how that's not really the answer.
Yeah.
That was what you were suggesting. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little
Yeah.
more.
The idea to that piece was the thesis essentially unplugging is not the answer. I think in this moment in which we feel as if, hey, these platforms are not entirely serving me, I'm going to smash my phone and, adopt the digital Sabbath dumb phone kind of analog lifestyle, which I think is aspirational, but it's also very unsustainable, especially as so many of our cornerstones of society are built upon now technology, banking, education, housing, whatever it may be. It's dependent upon technology. And second, it's unsustainable because meanwhile, the rest of the world is finally getting connected to the internet and finally having access to digital technologies and smartphones. So right as the rest of the world is coming on, I think only a select few are saying, well, this isn't working for me, so let's, burn the thing down or, smash the phones. With that, I think there's an in-between, which is kind of what we've been hinting at, finding a sense of responsibility and mindfulness. The reason I think it falls upon us is because the platforms aren't incentivized to remind you it's time to take a break, right? It's literally called a feed. Like a feed is literally a trough. Like it wants you to keep eating and eating and eating. It doesn't want you to say, hey, maybe you're full, time to go, right? Antithetical to the business model. So for that reason, it's such a tough pill to swallow. And it's one of the very few pieces that there was very vocal pushback where it's like, absolutely not. You have to hold platforms accountable. And there's something to be said. It's, there's this too big to fail mentality, and, smashing your phone leaves the mess behind you for other people to unfortunately have to experience. So the long short, what I'm trying to get at here is back to this idea of accountability and agency. That's just not a message a whole lot of people want to hear. And there needs to be other prerequisites. Those I don't entirely know. Maybe you could figure them out as to what is required to make those conversations even easier to hear. Because when you say, hey, it's on you, that means, wait a second, it's my fault that I have a bad relationship with my phone.
Totally. I mean, I have this conversation constantly. I'm an executive coach, and so I work with a lot of women in entrepreneurial or executive positions. And this is something that comes up all the time, is like their relationship with their phone, with social media, being online chronically and constantly checking their emails, constantly checking Slack. And they're always like, how do I do less of this? Because they go through this like shame spiral as well. They make themselves feel
Yeah.
terribly for doing those things. And I'm constantly having to unpack, okay, well, why are you doing those things in the first place? Like, what are you getting out of it? We have to kind of sift through the good and the bad and the in between. Like, I think that's necessary to sit there and be like, you know what, I get some good things from social media. These are the bad things specifically, or like the things that specifically trigger me, because that is something that has been interesting to see across my clientele. Is it's different for everyone. What triggers them or what hooks them, like what keeps them there, it's not necessarily the same. And so to sit down again and like critically think and assess your relationship with technology in that way is like profound. And then they'll start to identify, oh, okay, well, now I know what the top problem is, right? So I can prioritize, okay, I need to do this. Let's say it's like setting an alarm to turn, put your phone down, put it on the charger for the night. Like there are specific things that might come up in terms of solutions from that. So again, I think that just goes back to, it's like you also need to seek help. And I think that's where like therapy, right, is so important. Having a coach or something like that, or just having, even to the point of getting back into intimate communities, having community or friends that you can go to and be like, this is impacting me in this way, and having space to be able to discuss why that is and how you might be able to solve that problem. So yeah, so again, I think it's fascinating because it's messy. It's not the same for everyone, and that is a big responsibility for these platforms. It's like, how do they figure that out if it's different for everyone in a lot of ways? Like, how do you solve that problem?
I think this conversation is symbolic of perhaps the worst outcome of our relationship, which is we've been hypnotized by this binary black and white thinking,
Yes.
right? I have to be completely addicted and tethered to all of my apps, or I have to light my phone on fire and live on an island by myself.
Yes.
There's something in between, and we get to pick what those things are in between. I mean, personal anecdote, I got to a point where I was checking Slack on my phone over the course of a weekend and like a Sunday morning in bed, no different than me scrolling through the New York Times. And I got to a point where I'm like, this is not healthy. And I deleted Slack. Hopefully no coworkers are listening to this. I haven't had Slack on my phone in 3 years. And that got to a point where I thought this is doing more harm than it is doing good. I could still maintain my job. I could still make sure I'm a good employee and a good coworker.
Yeah.
I also don't have to check this Sunday morning. And for me, it meant removing this app. Now, I didn't throw my phone out. And yes, I deleted an app. So in some regard, yes, I was opting out. But there's these tweaks and dials. And I think what we're trying to get at and what I'm trying to share with this story is that for me, it was that one app. Like that for me was, this isn't working.
Exactly.
I still have other apps on my phone. I still love my phone. I'm still an employee. I'm still doing fine. But there's a sliding scale of, well, how do we want to engage with these technologies? And how do we make sure they're serving us rather than us serving them?
Absolutely. I think that's the key question here is how do you ensure that the digital platforms you're engaging with serve you versus you serving them? Like that feels like the big question really that we're hinting at here in terms of people being able to solve problems for themselves. And then also, on the flip side, when it comes to organizations, like they should be asking that, like, how do we encourage our users or our, customers to think in that way as well, which not every company is going to do that, but that's an idealist perspective. But again, I think that's kind of the big question that we're circling here. To go into more of like existential crisis mode, because
Let's do it.
I feel like we should go there. What do you see as the most dangerous trends in how technology and media is influencing connection? Immediately, my mind goes into obviously how divisive social media platforms and the way we engage online is right now, but would love your thoughts on that.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think it's that. To add to it, I think it's actually like the second order effect to that, which is, yes, there's divisiveness. That said, for as long as humans have been humans, we have been divided. We can only survive with disagreement and argument and tension. That's how we negotiate. That's how
it's needed. It's necessary.
Exactly. It's actually, I think, the second order effect of today's divisiveness, which is the lack of awareness that we can agree to disagree. Historically, we've been able to say, I disagree with that person, and that's okay. Today, what is so existential is I disagree with this person, and I can never imagine how they have lived their life thinking that they could ever see the world any different than me. That is kind of new. We haven't really seen something like that before. So that, to me, if I could use hyperbole, is pretty terrifying. It is this idea of consensus collapse or narrative collapse. I think it's okay that we have competing narratives. That's fine. That's what myths are, and religions, and like that's not new. But I think the extremism of that is we can not fathom that someone else's narrative could exist at the same time as ours. And how do we come back from that?
Yeah, I know. It's like, how do we? Because it feels so overwhelming to think about. I mean, I just constantly, and to bring something up like relevant culturally would just happen with Meta, right? And their, like some of their content moderation policies, and people can't believe it, right? Like there are people who are incredibly enraged. And again, I think there are a lot of parts of that are problematic, but also I've heard people say exactly what you just said, where it's like, I can't even accept that these people can have these types of views and want to engage in this way. So to bring something up that's like specific, and hate to put you on the spot, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on something like that update recently with Meta.
Well, maybe I'll speak to it in the abstract in how we kind of move on from it, which is I think we could think of the little Chinese finger cuff
Mm-hmm.
little toy, which is the stronger we pull, the harder it is to get out of that trap.
Yes.
And I think it behooves us to, and it feels paradoxical, but to stop pulling so hard and maybe relax the tension and actually, ironically, come a little closer and kind of lean in. And I'm not sharing anything new, and it's so cliche at this point, but having curiosity
Yeah.
of, wait a second, how is it possible that someone can think of it or see it that way? And I think when we employ a little bit of curiosity, I think it's easier for us to actually kind of come out of that trap, because the second we completely disagree and pull far apart, like, doesn't change anything, doesn't change their
No.
worldview. In fact, it actually probably further calcifies it, making it harder for anyone to move on from their standpoint going forward. So I'll relate this just to kind of the day job and work. I find it problematic that there's an industry of people in advertising and marketing who are studying culture to help organizations. And even in that practice of trying to study trends in culture and a relationship, are viewing it through this lens of, how can these people think this way?
Ex-
Employing this bias and judgment. And
mm-hmm.
these are the people who are professionally meant to not think that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
see it every single day.
Yeah. I mean, I do as well. It's infiltrating every experience, every community and social interaction. I experience it every single day where it's like everybody can't believe everything. And it's like, well, we have to believe, like we have to try to understand. To your point about curiosity, it's like when you start to ask questions, well, how did we get here and why is it this way and why do people feel the way that they feel? You're able to better identify the root cause
Yeah.
of a problem. And I think in a lot of ways, like for example, I think with what's happening, on social media, and this is specific to maybe what's happening in politics in a lot of way, and we won't dive too far down that road. But I think it comes back to, like, let's say the education system, for example. And then I think it's healthier in some ways when you start to unpack, like, maybe these are the lived experiences that this person had that brought them to this thought or worldview. And then it's easier to then sit in front of that person or engage with that person because you're bringing in their lived experiences in some way. I don't know if that resonates at
No,
all.
it does resonate. My hot take here is, I think really what's beneath the surface that we really don't want to look in the eye is, I think what's driving this is this deep, deep, deep fear, which is, if I'm curious and ask a question and attempt to empathize, I may hear something or I may learn something that will change my own outlook and my own
Mm,
opinion, that would render my existing opinion to be incorrect. And that is such an identity and ideological risk that we
mm-hmm,
just won't do it.
mm,
And this goes back, to go full circle back to where we started, this idea that we have this haunting trail of digital content behind us, that to deviate away from that means I am not me, I am somebody else, I am wrong, and I'm going to contradict who I once was. It was very easy for us to do that before the internet and before a log of every single behavior of ours.
absolutely. It's like human beings are naturally contradicting. Like you are constantly having, even speaking to the fires here in LA, at the same time, I feel a sense of guilt, survival's guilt. I feel a sense of grief, loss of like my safety, my security in some way, even though, of course, there are variations of that. And then I also feel gratitude in a lot of ways. And it's really hard to kind of show up during this period of time and hold all of those truths together. And to that point, it's like with social media on top of that, where there's documentation of what you once thought or who you once were, to look that like just dead in the eye and be like, I now believe something different, it makes it so much harder because it's this dialogue or also this worry about perception, right? On top of how you already are kind of judging yourself. And I think, I mean, that's just so, it's, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a lot.
I'll one up that. Not only does it not permit contradiction, it doesn't even permit the character space.
Yeah.
There are character limits. So how in the world can you try to convey any sense of nuance when you don't even have the space in your post to do so?
That resonates with me actually so much because I really struggle with showing up. I have to for my business, but I really struggle with showing up online, specifically on like Instagram or LinkedIn, because when I sit down to write a post, the thoughts that I have or like what I want to share, I'm like, I can't possibly fit this into a post. And it takes me hours, like truly, it takes me hours to like whittle what my thought is down to this post, and I hate it. Like it actually, it pisses me off on a daily basis, and then it makes me resent the platforms. And then again, it's this vicious cycle of well, I feel like I have to show up here because it's detrimental to my business, but now it's, I in some ways I feel like it's diluting my thoughts and uh diluting my value to potential clients. Like it's just, it's a vicious cycle. But to end on an optimistic note here, I am curious if there are any innovations or cultural shifts, and we've touched on some, that you are optimistic about. And I'll actually share one as an example.
Mhm.
So I was recently introduced to the concept of cultural leapfrogging. I don't know if you've heard of
No,
that term before.
explain.
I read the Substack by Dr. Alice Evans. She's a social scientist, and she has a newsletter called The Great Gender Divergence. And in this article that I read, she defined cultural leapfrogging as a phenomenon where societies or groups bypass traditional stages of development by adopting, let's say, certain practices, technologies, or cultural norms through the consumption of media. And then that often reshapes their identity or systems, and it enables rapid transformation regardless of economic development. So a lot of people assume that economic development is the top priority. That's the way to change society, change systems, and things like that. But to bring context into this, it's like mobile internet now reaches 57% of the global population. And so a young woman, let's say in Malaysia, might not identify with the cultural ideas of prestige or masculinity where
Mhm.
she lives locally. And so instead, now she can go into a streaming platform and watch Emily in Paris. And she'll see a woman who is prioritizing her autonomy, flexing her agency. And then that inspires her to, let's say, join a women's group, a local women's group. And she starts talking about her dynamics at home and realizes, wow, actually, my husband is resents me in a lot of ways because I have an education, I have a job, I am financially secure independently from him. And then that leads her to, let's say, get a divorce. And again, she's prioritizing herself instead of deflating herself
Mhm.
to coexist next to him. Like I look at things like that and I'm like, we need to talk about that. Like we need to focus on that and rally behind it because that is so positive. Like that is incredible to me. So I'm curious, like if there are any other pockets of light that you see, similarly to that.
I absolutely love that. I almost want to just say plus one and co-sign that. I I do think this idea of the long tail is incredibly powerful, not a new
Mhm.
concept. What I think is so powerful about that is that finally, with this bottoms up participation, which we really haven't seen before until really only recently, have we been able to see ourselves and see alternatives in the media or ideas that we otherwise didn't know existed. Now, the difficulty to that is I think we have cracked the barriers to entry, but we have not cracked the barriers to discovery. So
Mm,
these ideas and these influencers or these personalities, they're out there. However, it is way too difficult still to make that access or that discovery easy. So I feel like we're so close to that.
yeah,
And that to me excites me because the ideas are there, the people are there, right? That video exists on the internet. We are so close.
so
I
close.
think that final mile is how do we also design systems in which it's this idea of design for emergence, where rather than a platform telling you, here's how to get from A to B, as a user, I can chart my own path and discover A to C to J to K, then to B in my own kind of discovery path
Yeah,
that works best for me. So we're so close.
so close, and I feel like there's just such an opportunity. I think this is a testament to the power of storytelling as well. It's like there's such an opportunity, especially with YouTube. I mean, young people are constantly on that platform, and I think it's like, what if we invested more in storytelling, like at scale, like quality storytelling at scale, and then created, let's say, educational programs related to the themes in
Mm,
that story to encourage that self discovery. So it's like you show up and you watch this and you're going to pick out whatever resonates with you. Now here's a tool to unpack that for yourself. That's something that I don't see a lot of. Actually, Ava DuVernay, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, unsure, but she has started to do this where with each documentary or film that she's producing, she's now creating curriculum
mm,
around it. And I'm like, that, like, give me more of
yeah,
that. And I think even creators can do that, right? You don't
right.
have to be Ava, who is this, insane film director, producer. You can do that
Yeah.
on smaller scales as well. So yeah, I think it's such an important bright spot to
It's
look at.
possible, right? It's to your point, like it's
Yeah,
possible to do that today. I think what is required is just to see other Avas doing it. And then,
exactly.
oh, wait, I can do that too. I can do that. That's simple.
That's what we're trying to do here. So, to round it out, we're at the end. I want to let you go. Don't want to keep you too long. We are asking everyone who comes on this podcast this question. I'm curious what the most self centered thing you've ever done is.
Mm, most self centered thing. The most self centered thing I've done, I took, this is 2019, pre pandemic. I took a trip to Joshua Tree by myself,
Love Joshua Tree.
and it was about 5, 6 days of just me, myself, and I,
Hmm.
and just being with myself in like a truly, this sounds kind of sappy, but like in a radical fashion of just like just me, no one else, everyone knows where I am, I'm safe, I'm fine, and kind of basking in that and
Mm-hmm.
just being with me. And that was with, right, some discomfort, but just making the time in the space. And it's kind of exaggerated because I don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go to a desert to do so. But for me, it kind of had to be exaggerated to like truly say like, no, 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 make space, make room. I'm doing this. And a lot of thinking, a lot of journaling, a lot of meditation. Again, could have been done on my couch, but for me, it was kind of relishing in the no, I'm going to a desert and doing this.
Yeah, the
And
importance of changing your environment,
yes,
having a different kind of experience, and like going outside of your normal routines, rituals,
yeah,
habitat. It is so important, and I think oftentimes a lot of people feel so guilty doing that and being like,
yes,
"All right, friends, or whoever it is, I'm going to peace out for a week. Talk to you later." That's powerful.
exactly. And I look back and I am so glad I took that trip because it was just kind of a moment in time where I could. and work afforded it and relationships afforded it. And it did feel a little selfish, and it did feel a little, I don't know, exaggerated, but I also know it was a trip that I can't really do again in just my current life stage. And I'm glad I took it. And that in itself, I feel was kind of a, I don't know, a nice milestone in self-love.
It's like the importance of seizing an opportunity when you have it in that way. Well, Matt, I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
As did I.
I really admire your work. So I want to say that I am an avid reader and, consumer of your content. And I actually discovered you through one of my clients, Ariba Jahan. She was part of your most recent seminar cohort. I've been working with her for a while, and she introduced me to you. So I just want to say, like, this was a dream come true for me. And I'm grateful to be connected.
It's such a small world. I think that that's maybe the perfect place to end, which is like, we're talking a whole lot about the ills of our technology and our media, but it's maybe worth ending on the high note and the silver lining, which is it's also working in many regards.
In so many regards. Like, in what other world do we have access to each other, right? Or can I discover someone like you, or for Olivia and I to meet and become lifelong friends? It's a beautiful thing. So thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.
As we sat with everything Matt shared, one of my biggest takeaways was how clearly he named the cost of frictionless design. How systems built for ease, convenience, and constant engagement slowly train us out of reflection, accountability, and self-trust.
And for me, it was his reframing of discomfort, not as something to avoid, but as something essential. Matt helped articulate how curiosity, friction, and even disagreement are not signs of failure in connection, but prerequisites for it. Without them, we don't deepen, we just perform.
We hope this conversation gave you new language for noticing how the systems you use are shaping how you relate, and where small intentional shifts might create more presence, agency, and care.
You've been listening to a Double Tap episode of Self-Centered. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen. And share this episode with someone who's thinking deeply about connection in the digital age.
For more updates and behind-the-scenes moments, follow us on Instagram at A Self-Centered Pod.
And as always, don't forget to be a little self-centered. See you next time.